In recent weeks, we've seen people strive to the limits of their physical ability, to varying degrees of success, after years of training, ensuring that they're in peak condition for their events in their particular sport. Their endeavours can inspire us, or just give us a sense of awe. But have you ever thought just how truly amazing your own body really is? Over the last year or so, many of us have really appreciated just being able to go out for a walk, and we've learned to acknowledge the incredible beauty of the natural world around us. But how did the human body become so amazing? There is a view that's simply accepted by many people, that all the abilities that you and I have are the result of random chance, life having originated in some chemical soup and evolved purely by chance, by random changes, little by little, to all the diverse wonder and beauty that we can see around us today. That is not, however, what the Bible says. In fact, the very first verse of the Bible simply says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." God spoke. God gave the directive. And the end result is light and darkness, land and sea, trees and plants and vegetation, sun, moon, stars, fish and birds, all manner of creatures walking on the earth. And finally people, male and female, made in the image of God. And we're not told the elaborate detail of the method involved. There is no in-depth analysis of the work of creation or any major discussion of how God made the heavens and the earth. But there is a conclusion. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Clearly, there are some people, through birth, accident, illness or infirmity, for whom even the basic movements are a daily challenge or not even possible. But many of us take for granted the things that we can do. Walk up a hill, climb over a stile, without really thinking about it, to be honest. For the next few minutes, we're going to look at one aspect of how your body works. Whether you're an Olympic athlete, whether you're heading off to the great outdoors, or just reaching for the remote control. How do we move a muscle?
This is a basic diagram of the human nervous system. There are nerves which take information from all over our body to the brain and spinal cord. The sensations of heat and cold, touch, pain, vibration, the position of our joints, what we see, hear, taste and smell. The brain and spinal cord have to process that information and then respond to it. We might simply turn our head towards a sound or coordinate a complex series of sensory information such as riding a bicycle or playing hockey. To enable you to do that, you have some important nerve cells called motor neurons. These carry the signals from our brain and spinal cord that tell the muscles to move. This is a basic diagram of a motor neuron. The spider-like top part of the cell has what are called dendrites. They receive the information from other cells. This might be a chemical message from another nerve cell. And what is going on is that that chemical message changes some small proteins in the membrane, the outer layer of the cell. If the signal is strong enough, that generates an electrochemical impulse that travels down the axon, a bit like electricity conducted through a wire. The axon has an insulating sheath around it which allows the electrochemical impulse, which is known as an action potential, to travel very fast. When the action potential reaches the neuromuscular junction, the place where the nerve meets the muscle, it sends its own chemical signal to the muscle cell which causes it to contract. This is one amazing piece of biological machinery, a protein called the sodium-potassium pump. This is what primes the nerve cell to be able to conduct an electrochemical impulse. The doctors and scientists who discovered it were awarded the Nobel Prize for their discovery. It controls how much sodium, that's the salt we put on our chips, and how much potassium is inside and outside the cell. Sodium inside the cell is pumped out and potassium is pumped in. But it isn't equal. For every 3 sodium ions pumped out, 2 potassium ions are pumped in. And that difference creates a tiny electrochemical gradient, about minus 70 millivolts, which is enough to enable the action potential to travel down the nerve cell. Note that it requires the body's source of energy, known as ATP, for each pump cycle. It's a powered pump. This is another amazing protein which sits within the cell membrane, the outer layer of the nerve cell. When the dendrites at the top of the nerve cell receive a large enough stimulus, sodium flows into the nerve cell, reducing the difference in sodium concentration on either side of the membrane, and this changes the voltage across the cell membrane. This opens these voltage-gated channels. At this point, sodium rushes into the cell through the voltage-gated sodium channel, causing a much greater change in the electrical potential. Following this, potassium flows out the cell through the voltage-gated potassium channel. This has the effect of resetting the voltage across the membrane. But in that moment, where the voltage across the cell membrane has changed, the voltage-gated channel next to the first one opens, and the voltage changes there. And the channel next to that one opens, and the voltage changes there. And it's almost like a Mexican wave. This change in electrical potential rushes down the axon. Then the sodium-potassium pump pushes the sodium out and the potassium back in, priming the system ready for the next nerve signal, the next action potential to be carried.
This all sounds really complicated, but really these are like valves. If you have a little look inside your washing machine, you'll see that water comes in at the back here, and there are 2 electronically controlled solenoid valves that allow water into the washing machine at various points during the wash cycle. We might call these voltage-gated water channels. And to get water out the washing machine, you have a water pump which uses electrical energy to push water out the washing machine, just a bit like a sodium-potassium pump. One key difference is that no one believes that their washing machine or any of its parts exist by nothing more than random chance.
This is where the nerve and muscle meet. This is the nerve, this is the muscle cell, inside of which is a muscle fibre, a myofibril. Now the muscle fibre consists of 2 long straight proteins which are able to slide over each other. The blue one in the diagram is called actin and the red one is called myosin. The green matrix around the muscle fibre acts like a reservoir of calcium. When the action potential arrives at the neuromuscular junction, a chemical messenger is released, and that causes the release of calcium ions from the reservoir around the muscle fibre. Now this is where it truly gets breathtaking, when we glimpse a little of the detail of how these 2 proteins, actin and myosin, slide over one another. Myosin is a protein with a globular head structure on a stalk, and given the opportunity, it will bind to actin. It can only bind when an action potential travels down the nerve and causes calcium to be released around the muscle fibre. At that point, myosin binds to actin, and then a powered change in the shape of myosin occurs. The angle of the stalk changes, and myosin acts like a lever on the actin protein, moving it along and causing the muscle to contract. Notice that it is ATP again, that is the energy that drives muscle contraction. Here is a video animation showing this muscle contraction happening, with the myosin heads binding to actin, levering it along, releasing, resetting, binding to actin again, levering it along, releasing and resetting, and the long actin proteins slide together. That's a muscle contracting. Now just a word about ATP. It stands for adenosine triphosphate, and it's the fuel that your body uses for the vast majority of its molecular processes. And it's made in an ATP factory called the mitochondria. These are the power stations inside each of our cells. Here is a more detailed illustration of a neuron, and you can see these small elongated egg-shaped parts called mitochondria. Inside them they have an intricately folded membrane which supports yet another protein, and this one really is special. It's called ATP synthase. Its job is to make ATP, and it's an example of molecular motor protein. ATP synthase is embedded in the inner membrane of a mitochondria, but it isn't there on its own. There are a chain of proteins effectively creating a power supply for this motor. This is where the vast majority of the energy from your cornflakes and toast ends up, creating a reservoir of hydrogen ions, or protons, to drive this molecular motor. Electric motors are driven by a current of electrons. This motor is driven by a current of protons.
Let's just briefly look at an electric motor. This one comes from a washing machine. If I take it apart, you'll see that it has a stationary part, that's this section here, known as the stator, and it has a rotating part known as the rotor. The motor uses electricity, a flow of electrons, passing through these coils in the stator and the rotor to make an electromagnetic force which causes the rotor part to, rotate. That's then connected to the washing machine drum via a belt during the wash cycle, turning the drum over.
You can see in this animation that ATP synthase has a stationary part, a stator, and a rotating part, a rotor, and each turn of the structure creates 3 molecules of ATP. So human ATP synthase is made of 18 different proteins. As you can see from the diagram, some are used more than once to make a total of 29 separate protein subunits, some of which are 492 amino acids long. Amino acids are the basic building blocks of proteins. Your DNA encodes the order in which these amino acids are assembled to make a particular protein, and getting the right amino acid in the right order is fundamental to how a protein folds up and interacts with the cell membrane and other molecules. It is crucial for a protein to function correctly.
There are 20 different amino acids in the human body making up our proteins. The chance of randomly getting 492 of them in the right order to make one of the 18 separate proteins in this amazing structure. It's 20 times 20 times 20 for a total of 492 times. When you roll a dice, there's a 1 in 6 chance of getting a number 6. There is a 1 in 45 million chance of winning the national lottery. If you and a friend were both blindfolded and taken separately to every beach and every desert in the world and asked to randomly choose 1 grain of sand, the chance of you choosing exactly the same grain of sand is estimated as being something like 1 in a number with 18 zeros in. That's 1 in a million times a million times a million. Common sense would tell you that's not going to happen. The chance of randomly assembling the 492 amino acids in the correct sequence for just 1 protein subunit of human ATP synthase is 1 in a number with 640 zeros in. In short, it's impossible. And yet this amazing structure is essential to life. The human body is a complex system. Sensory input travels to the spine and the brain. The heat of a fire, the feel of a fly on your arm, the sound of a child crying, the decision to take a step forward, or even the sight of a cricket ball coming towards you. And it brings about a movement. It does so by triggering an action potential, an electrochemical signal that runs down the axon, the nerve fibre, and then the signal causes an electrochemical change in the neuromuscular junction, which then causes calcium to be released inside the muscle, and that triggers the ratchet movements of the actin and myosin fibres. And the muscle contracts, moves your arm, your leg, your hand, whatever part of you the nerve is going to. So here is a complex system. There's a switch on the boot of your car, which when you pull it, 2 pieces of metal complete an electrical circuit. Electricity from your car battery is conducted down the wire to a solenoid motor which opens the lock and releases the boot. Or it should do if it's working properly. Unfortunately, one of the component parts isn't working. I can hear the switch engaging with a click, so we'd better have a look inside and see what the problem is. So here is the switch, which seems to be working, giving an afferent input like the dendrites of your nerve cell, and when you pull it hard enough it travels down the wires, which are insulated like a myelin sheath, to the solenoid motor, which is in there. At that point, an electromagnetic field generates a movement which releases the lock, except it doesn't. So in this case, the system is useless because one of the parts doesn't work. There's no advantage to this car having a switch and wires if the solenoid motor in the lock doesn't work. Fortunately, with a car, I have a new lock which can replace the defective one. There, a working system again. As a complex system, the human body needs all the components to be present and working to function properly. A supposedly evolved voltage-gated sodium channel is no use to anyone without a sodium-potassium pump, a neuromuscular junction, and an actin and myosin complex within the muscle fibre. Someone who's had a stroke, they have an axon and a working muscle fibre, but they can't generate the signal in the brain. Someone with a spinal cord injury, they have a functioning brain and muscle fibres in their legs, but sadly the axon has been damaged and the person is often unable to walk. Myasthenia gravis is a muscle condition where there is damage to the neuromuscular junction. That reduces the ability of the body to use the nerve impulse, the action potential, to repeatedly trigger strong muscle contractions. People who have one of the rare genetic conditions that cause muscular dystrophy, they often have a different amino acid sequence in a protein that holds actin to the wall of the muscle cell. That protein either doesn't work or is less effective. The muscles become weak and eventually the muscle cells can die. Their brain and axons are fine, but the muscle cell doesn't function properly. And there are no significant illnesses or conditions where there is a mutation affecting the function of the ATP synthase enzyme itself, because that amazing protein structure has to be assembled and working with all its component parts and its own individual energy supply for life to exist. And the chance of just one part of it occurring by chance, well, simply put, it's impossible. Simply put, it is absolutely amazing when we just glimpse the complexity involved in just moving a muscle and the intricate structure of just a few of the component protein parts. Each one of them has to be there, working from the word go for the whole system to function. And that's just one little part of the complex system that makes each one of us live and breathe and function. Now, each one of us has the ability to ask questions, to look at the evidence, and to come to our own conclusions. In the words of King David, who lived about 1,000 years before Jesus was born, and who wrote these words in a psalm of praise to God: O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well.